Now we're moving on to our graffiti project. The first step that we need to do is we need to make the facade of the walls. So we're going to make the wall and we're going to cut it out of foam board and we're going to remove the windows out of it and create a brick-like texture that you see on this board. Tools that you're going to need are going to be your X-Acto knife, steel ruler, drafting triangle, and your foam board. If you're using a new piece of foam board, then you can trust that it's square if it has a nice factory edge. Mine does. I'm checking it with my triangles though, just to make sure that's square. If it is not, you can do the same technique that we talked about before where you draw a line and then make it square off of that by measuring it. Or you can check your diagonals to make sure that your foam board is squared up and good to go. Now the first thing that you want to do is start figuring out the overall size of what you're working on. We're translating straight from our rendering, so we're going to be doing 1:1, so I can go straight to my steel ruler. I don't need to use my scale ruler. So I'm going to check the overall height and width. I'm going to make a note where that measurement is, and then I'm going to translate over to the foam board, and then I can go ahead and cut that piece straight out. When you go to cut, you want to make long, even, smooth lines, and then you'll end up with a very clean piece of foam that looks nicely scored without jaggedy bits in the middle. If you've measured it right, you should actually fit right along with what that rendering shows. So now that we've gotten the width, we're going to do the height. So you should have your measurement for how tall this is. Do the same thing you did before, mark on each side, draw a line between them, and then nice and even cut to score it. Now you have your overall dimension for your wall. We need to figure out where those windows sit because we're going to take the windows out so that we can put a frame in later. So I'm going to measure where that window sits in the wall. I'm going to square it off because what I'm seeing has a little bit of an optical illusion with those curved bits that come out. So make a choice, square it, figure out how far it comes in from the edge of the wall and how tall it is, how far it comes down from the top of the wall. You always want to have an anchor that you're measuring in from and down from. So again, in from the side, down from the top, and then figure out how tall that window itself is. Once you have those measurements, copy it over onto your foam and go ahead and move on to the next wall. Do that for all of them, get them all transferred over. Now that you have it all measured out, you need to cut out those windows. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our X-Acto knife and our steel ruler, and you're going to plunge the X-Acto knife into the corner. Like normal cuts, you're going to do several passes. Don't try to go through too much at once, and try to get that tip right tight into the corner. You're going to reverse direction because you're not going to cut all the way through. You want to come back and complete the cut coming from the other direction. The reason for this is that it will give you nice sharp corners in each part of your square or rectangle that you're trying to cut out. You're going to do this for all of the windows that you're cutting out, and then hopefully it will release nicely when those windows are ready to come out. If they don't release nicely, flip your foam over to the other side, and you're going to nice and steadily score it so that you can encourage them to pop out from the other direction. And when you're done, go back and clean up your corners so that they are nice and pretty and tight and squared off. There's no little extra bits of foam hanging out in there. Now that I have my windows, I'm going to do the door. So figure out again, like you did from the windows, how far in does that door come from the outside of the wall? Mine is raised a little bit, so there's a stairwell, so I'm going to figure out how tall up it is. And then I'm going to figure out how tall that door itself is. I'm going to mark this all out, and then I'm going to cut it out. And now I have my base that all of my windows are going to sit inside. I'm going to next get that first layer of foam pulled off so that I can create my brick texture. So I'm going to carefully score and then carefully peel it back, just pulling the paper layer off of the foam. It may want to tear. If that happens, carefully take your X-Acto knife and convince that little edge where it stopped to safely peel up and work the entire wall. Once you're done, you're ready to carve your brick. Now to create your brick, what you're going to do is you're going to figure out the scale of what you're working on. You can measure that from your rendering, you can kind of guesstimate it and make your own choices, but you're going to figure out how tall each brick is and how wide each brick is. And then you're going to work on making those measurements transfer over to what you're working on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put consistent markings that show how tall my brick is, and I'm going to do that on each side of my wall. Next, I'm going to repeat the process on the other side. You can see that those marks that I made, because I used a mechanical pencil, actually left grooves in the foam. That will be really, really helpful later and save us a bunch of steps. So flipping over and doing the same thing all over again. Now that both sides are scored, I need to connect them together. So here's an important part. I am not relying on my pencil lead to draw these lines. I'm using the fact that the mechanical pencil itself has a very tiny little point at the top that can be used to score lines as I go. So as I connect these, I'm forcing the foam to have a line in it. I'm not just drawing a line onto it. We'll look at what this looks like in a second. Once you're done, clean up any little straggly bits from the sides and make sure it's all nice and tight and smooth and ready to go. But you should have a wall that looks like this. Now this is not what brick looks like. You have the horizontal runs, but now you need to get the width of the bricks themselves. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our ruler and we're going to figure out where on it each brick is going to live. There's different types of brick patterns, so I'm going to show you a running brick. The brick on your wall may be different. Here you can see I have my top row done. So on a running brick pattern, each row starts in the middle of the row before it. So my second row is going to start in the middles of the top row that I just did. So I'm going to use my ruler again, figure out mathematically where that midpoint lives, and then use that to score the next one. For all of the subsequent rows, I'm going to alternate between those two measurements. And like always, clean up the little bits that start to hang out off of your edges to make it look nice and clean. When you're done, you should have a brick wall. So the next step on this is that we have to stand this up, and this wall is not the most supportive thing ever. You're going to need something to kind of keep it upright. So what we're going to do is we're going to add 2 side walls and a base. Your side walls can be as thick or thin as you deem necessary. I'm going to go ahead and default to the thickness of my steel ruler just because that's easy. So first step, I want to figure out the height of what these side walls are going to be. So I'm going to do the same height that I did for my first wall for both the right and the left sides. And now that my 2 side pieces are going to cut, I'm going to move on to the base. Your base, you're going to have to decide based on the rendering that you got. You need it to be as thick as your side walls and front wall together, and then have a little bit in the front to have some form of texture, whether it's going to be a sidewalk or cobblestone or whatever the design you're copying looks like. Once those are done, just like before, you need to pull off the foam from the paper, and then you're going to do the exact same process where you're going to score lines to make your brick. Important thing to do for these side walls is to make sure that your brick lines up with the brick that you did on the front, otherwise it's going to look really weirdly mismatched. Now for these side walls, I got a little bit less precise because a little bit of hit and miss is fine. I also want to think about how it's terminating to the sides. So here I'm taking my X-Acto knife and I'm cutting off on an angle carefully to kind of have it taper off, because I think that's going to be a nicer effect than having a hard, sharp edge where the brick is at. Once I'm done, I can line it up. They should fit nicely together. And then I'm going to rinse and repeat and do the other side exactly the same. Now that I have my sidewalls cut, it's time to glue them all together. As you glue, make sure that you're constantly checking that they are lined up and meeting flush on the edges. For the final piece, I need to do the base. So for my base, I'm going to do a sidewalk because that's what I see in my rendering. So I'm going to do the same thing I did on the side walls. I'm going to peel off the bottom and then I'm going to score it to look like a sidewalk based on, again, the same dimensions that I see in my picture. You may notice that I stopped scoring it right where the edge of the wall sits on the base. The reason for this is because it's good to have a nice flat surface to glue to. So I don't want to have the uneven texture of the foam there. I want to have a nice smooth paper part. Once that's finished, it's ready to glue the base onto the finished brick wall. So I'm going to line it up, make sure that it fits nicely, always dry fit, and then I'm going to glue the edges that are going to make contact. I'm going to press it down onto the base, and I'm going to hold it nice and secure until the glue starts to dry a little bit. Once you're finished, leave it to cure.